in Iraq with U.S. troops and Americans in harm's way unnecessarily, in the view of many, because of the provocative, potentially unlawful actions of the President of the United States with respect to the recent strike. At our meeting today, we had a very robust discussion as it relates to the moment that we are in, the situation that we confront in the Middle East. We were graced by the presence of Ambassador Wendy Sherman, who was one of the lead negotiators of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, that the president's reckless actions have all but disintegrated, making us less safe here in America and throughout the world. And we also heard from Deputy Director Haynes as it as it relates to the underlying legal basis of the president's actions. Cowboy diplomacy did not work in Vietnam. Cowboy diplomacy did not work in Iraq. Cowboy diplomacy will not work in Iran. We are hopeful that the administration will de-escalate this situation and that the president will move forward in a responsible fashion, working with our partners and allies, particularly as it relates to the European Union, to move the world into a better space. Let me yield to our distinguished Vice Chair of the caucus, the Gentle Lady from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Catherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, thank you for your leadership. Let me start by saying that our thoughts and prayers are with American troops and diplomats in Iraq and around the world at this time. Despite what the president has tweeted, all is not well. As the world witnessed last night, the president's actions last week have set off an avalanche of chaos that endangers our service members, diplomats, the Iraqi people, and Americans. We must commit to de-escalating this crisis in front of us. To that end, the House plans this week to vote on a War Powers resolution to reconfirm Congress's long-established oversight responsibilities by mandating that if no further congressional action is taken, the administration's military hostilities with Iran must cease within 30 days. Our purpose is clear. We stand ready to keep Americans safe and secure and to prevent this from escalating into a war with Iran. While we face turmoil abroad, we also must remain focused on keeping Americans safe at home. And to do that, we will this week vote on the PFAS Action Act of 2019, which will require that the EPA use tools under several environmental statutes to stem the flow of contamination through the cleanup of sites, regulating emissions, and prohibiting unsafe incineration. American families deserve and need access to clean water and clean air. And we have seen this administration erode environmental policies and roll back protections. We are not going to stand on the sidelines and let American families suffer. As members of Congress, our first responsibility is to keep the American people safe. It's an obligation that this White House has lost sight of. The military airstrike targeting high-level Iranian military officials was reckless and it was dangerous. And we are so glad in this Democratic caucus to have the level of expertise on national security that we can call on to help us protect the American people in these dangerous times. So I'm very pleased to bring to the podium Representative Xochitl Torres Small.
Thank you, Catherine. In the last 6 days, I have understood the responsibility that Congress has to this country and that I have to my constituents in a way I never could have before. We know that General Soleimani was a terrorist. We know that he was worse than a terrorist because he had and commanded individuals within a nation state. And because of that gravity, we know that there are severe consequences that must be assessed in the wake of these actions. The responsibility that we have is to require a strategy moving forward. Because the question we face today is whether the United States' actions to eliminate General Soleimani puts us at greater threat or could push two countries into a prolonged military conflict. We don't know what the strategy is, and that's why we need to gather the information to determine the answer to that question. What was the intelligence that led to this action? What was the source for that intelligence? How trustworthy was that source? In evaluating whether or not there was an imminent threat to America, what was the evaluation about the potential repercussions or response that Iran would have? What was the evaluation of potential responses that others in support of Iran would take? With 15,000 more troops now on the ground than we had in the region 6 months ago, what are we sending our troops away from their families for? These are the questions that we have to have answered. We have more questions right now than we have answers. We don't know the strategy, and we know that revenge is not a strategy. That is why we have to assess what are the consequences that we face in the future. Because with 3,000 troops deployed just in the last few days, with the strikes experienced last night, we know that the consequences are real. And that is why it is necessary for the administration to supply answers to these questions and to coordinate with Congress moving forward. Our responsibilities are great, and we must bear those responsibilities together. With that, I will bring my colleague Andy Kim, representative New Jersey, as well to speak on this issue.
Thank you for that. A couple things I just want to start with here today. It really just kind of dawned on me overnight, just the severity of what had happened in terms of just having our armed servicemen and women, our diplomats, in harm's way. We have to just kind of take a step back here and recognize that they came under direct attack from missiles launched from Iran. That is a very dangerous place to be. Since the very beginning of this crisis, I really have tried to focus in on those Americans that are in harm's way right now. We definitely need to get the answers that my colleague just talked about. We definitely need to think through next steps and the war powers and the legality of it all. But it is just so critically important that we do everything we can to be able to make sure that Americans in harm's way are safe and that we work together. If ever there's an area where we can all work together right now, that is a place for it. Beyond where we're at right now and the imminent sort of next steps that might arise, what we do know is that there's been lasting damage to our core priorities in the Middle East. The damage that has been done to our fight against ISIS, the damage that has been done to our relationship with Iraq, and we know what is at stake right now in terms of those next steps. Also, the damage that has been done in terms of basically taking off the table any chance for a diplomatic solution to rein in Iran's nuclear ambitions. These are the things that are also on my mind, and we should be thinking through. It can't just be about this crisis in a vacuum. This is something that is being weighed alongside all the different other priorities that we have, and this administration certainly has a lot to answer for in terms of why they took the decisions that they have, and why they were willing to put at risk such core priorities to us, like fighting ISIS and keeping Americans safe. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jason Crow.
Thank you, Andy and Sochiol, and Chairman Jeffries and Vice Chair Clark for your leadership on this issue. There is no doubt that General Soleimani was a bad man. You know, I know that well from personal experience. I know what it's like to load wounded American soldiers into the back of trucks in Baghdad in the summer of 2003 that were wounded during IED attacks. Many of those IED attacks orchestrated and trained and equipped by General Soleimani and his forces. But I also know that a shoot first and ask questions later approach rarely turns out well. And I also know that when politicians talk tough in this town, it's young men and women, 18, 19, 20-year-old women from my community, from their communities that have to pick up rifles, put on uniforms, and go to do the work to back up that tough talk. So the question is not whether General Soleimani was a dangerous person. The question facing us here today is whether or not the administration has a plan in place to deal with the consequences of the actions that they took last week. What I see is a series of actions that have jeopardized our standing in Iraq in the presence of U.S. soldiers in that region, that have undermined our credibility with our NATO allies, and increased the risk to U.S. soldiers and troops in the region. There's a reason why, as we sit here right now, there are 7,000 additional troops rushing to reinforce our embassies and our facilities in that region, our rapid reaction forces. It's because the threat has increased. There are missiles raining down on our bases in the last 24 hours. All of this is the consequence of the actions last week. So the question facing us now is, what is the plan and how do we go forward? The time is always right for the U.S. Congress, the representatives of the people, to have a serious discussion with the American people and the administration about what is right and how do we commit young men and women into harm's way around the world. That is why I was proud to join almost 40 of my colleagues this morning to send a letter to President Trump and Secretaries Esper and Pompeo outlining our concerns and what questions that we need to have answered, not just today during the classified briefing, but going forward as we embark on a discussion about what we do to secure this country. So I'm honored to be joining with my colleagues to have that discussion, and we look forward to your questions.
Let me just say, we're so thankful for the class of 2018 and all of the life experience, the patriotic experience that they have brought to bear over the last year to the United States Congress, to the people that they're privileged to represent. And Sochi and Andy and Jason lead the Caucus National Security Task Force. And it's times like this that we lean on their expertise and that the American people will benefit from their expertise. Questions? Second row. Yeah, there was no discussion about that in the caucus meeting today. The meeting lasted about an hour and 15 minutes. I support the decision of the Speaker to hold the articles until we get some clarity as to whether there will be a fair, impartial, and comprehensive trial in the Senate.
Good morning, and this is a question for you, but also Ms. Clark, since you referenced this here about this War Powers resolution. I guess this is kind of a two-part question. It sounds like this resolution might be a little muddled right now because of the action, and regardless, is it prudent at this stage if you are going to go ahead and move forward with that when there's hostilities in the region?
It is an ongoing discussion as to the appropriate timing. We hope to move forward with something sooner rather than later. but there is no time frame, as I understand it, in terms of it absolutely taking place over the next day or two.
And because you had indicated you thought it was going to move this week. Did you know something different?
We certainly had hoped coming into this week to move it this week. We are looking at it. We are in the process of drafting what is a technical document, and we will do it as soon as possible. There is no set timeline, but if I can go back for a minute to the impeachment question, I do want to say that we are concerned with the comments of Senate Majority Leader McConnell, and consider that his comparison to the Clinton impeachment when it comes to calling witnesses is really an apples and oranges comparison. In the Clinton impeachment trial, those witnesses had already been deposed, they had testified, and were part of Starr's report. Here we have John Bolton coming forward saying he would respond to a subpoena, that he would come forward with the information that we need to know. Continuing to block, to coordinate this trial with the White House makes the Senate leader complicit in this obstruction of the facts that we need to put forth in the impeachment trial and put forward in front of the American people.
You know, I have often heard folks say, now is not the time to discuss the use of force and the commitment of U.S. soldiers around the region. I heard that in 2003 as I was carrying a rifle on the streets of Baghdad. I heard it in 2004 and 2005 as I was carrying a rifle in the mountains of Afghanistan. Here we are 19 years later. Thousands of American men and women have died. Tens of thousands have been wounded. We have spent over $4 trillion on our various conflicts, committed in over 30 countries around the world. The time is always right for the United States Congress to have a serious discussion with the American people about when and how we commit men and women into conflict around the world. And it's well past time that we have that serious discussion.
Are you concerned if the House would have passed this, and this was the concern by some Democrats who have military backgrounds like yours, that moving this resolution now would basically leave troops in the theater high and dry because you're essentially cutting off the 01 and the 02 AUMFs?
We will never leave troops in a difficult position. We are committed to making sure that our men and women are supported and protected. That is a unanimous belief across partisan lines. But we have to have a serious discussion, and we have to reassert Congress's constitutional role. It is our duty to make sure that we are conducting oversight, and we're having that discussion.
I'm going to go to the third row, but the Congress is provided with the constitutional authority alone to declare war.
The War Powers, the Progressive Caucus has advocated that two other measures come up with that, the Ro-Khanna bill on the funding restriction or prohibition if there's no authorization from Congress, and the Barbara Lee bill to repeal the 2002 AUMF. Do you see these coming out together as a package? Is that something the broader caucus could support?
Yeah, there are ongoing discussions as it relates to the specifics as to what the resolution could look like. We won't move forward until we have the robust support of every corner of the caucus. We want to act in a responsible fashion on behalf of the safety and security of the American people. That is what this is all about. First row.
Back to the substantive debate, you said you're tweaking it. Well, can you just give us some sense of the time frame? I mean, what could change in this War Powers resolution?
Well, again, I don't want to get out ahead of the discussions that are taking place. This is perhaps our most serious and solemn responsibility as it relates to issues of life and death, issues of war and peace. And the caucus, with great leadership from Speaker Pelosi, is committed to getting it right. Andy, you want to? Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. It was not a missed opportunity, but the facts that are before us at the moment are facts that we'll need to respond to, triggered by the president's actions that many view as irresponsible. You know, Donald Trump may have been an arsonist that lit a fuse that could plunge the Middle East into a catastrophic war, though he's trying to pretend as if he's the firefighter. That's a problem. And we need the administration, hopefully later on today, to begin to present to us a forward-looking vision, first and foremost, to keep Americans safe and out of harm's way, but to do so, as both Andy and Jason have talked about, in a responsible fashion moving forward. Third row.
Just going back to impeachment, McConnell's already said he has the votes to know what the resolution is going to look like. What do you gain by waiting to send the articles over?
As the Speaker has consistently indicated, it's very difficult for her to determine who would be appropriate impeachment managers to present the House's case in the absence of understanding the rules of engagement and what the contours of a trial would look like. Beyond, of course, Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler, who one would think are going to be logical choices and participants to lead the effort. But what we have seen over the last several weeks are the additional disclosure of documents that continue to highlight that the president did abuse his power by targeting an American citizen for political gain while withholding intentionally $391 million in military aid from a vulnerable Ukraine. Additional documents subsequent to the Speaker's decision to hold the articles have come out. That's a gain in terms of information to the American people. And we've also seen during this period of time that a critically important potential witness, John Bolton, has said he will testify if subpoenaed. John Bolton had direct communication with the president about this sordid matter and abuse of power. And we know from testimony from Dr. Fiona Hill, characterized this whole scheme as a drug deal and the president's main operative, Rudolph Giuliani, as a hand grenade.
So without getting out in front of yourself or resolving issues, can you talk a little bit about what the discussion is in the caucus around war powers, and as part of that, making sure whatever you guys pass aligns with Senator Kane's?
Yeah, let me yield to Representative Kim and Representative Crow to talk about what some of the considerations should be for us to proceed.
Well, look, what we need to be thinking through is what's going to yield actual results here. What can try to move this forward in a way that shows that that there's going to be a bipartisan approach as well, to the best of our ability. But look, I said this earlier today. This is certainly a big part of it. The war powers is important in terms of understanding the contours of what the president is able to do. But what we also know is that there are lots of different avenues in which the president can proceed with different types of kinetic action, that there are no firm limits that are going to be able to completely restrain what he is willing to do. So that is why it's so important that we have this process to bring out and understand from the president what the actual strategy that he is guided by is. And that's something that I want all of us to be mindful about. The reason why we're having this debate about the war powers and what this president is authorized to do is to bring out into the open and make him and his administration explain to us what exactly their goals are, what they are trying to achieve, and what the off-ramps are to ensure that we don't have major escalation here going forward that could lead to war. That is something that I have yet to hear from the administration. That is something that I'm very concerned about, and I need to hear from him, not just about the military efforts that they're engaged in, but what are their diplomatic outreach, what are the intelligence operations that are trying to help us understand where attacks, future attacks might occur. We are not out of the clear. We cannot let our guard down. We know that Iranian proxies and some of their more traditional outlets for violence are still very much operational and could very well strike. I just want to kind of put this into that broader context of why it is that we're moving forward with this and why we need to have that transparency for the American people to understand what exactly this president is willing to do and how far he's willing to go.
You also mentioned the practical side of things. How much is the discussion about meshing up with Tim Kaine's resolution so that it can pass the Senate?
Well, look, the idea is that we have something that can be able to pass through both chambers, and we want to have something that can then move forward. So I want to sort of see what it is that we can accomplish on that front if possible. But like said, there are lots of different considerations happening right now, a lot of robust discussion about that, and we'll see in the coming hours and days where that lands.
As Andy just indicated, the starting point here is we need clarity on what authorizations the administration is currently relying on. And there is disagreement within the administration itself, right? On one hand, you have members of the administration saying that they're relying on the imminent threat lawful authority for the strike. Then you have Mr. O'Brien just last week saying he's relying on the 2002 AUMF, one of the so-called zombie AUMFs. Yet just a couple of months ago during Armed Services Committee hearings, you have Secretary Esper and General Milley telling us that currently they are not relying on the 2002 AUMF for any military operations. So there's inconsistency, there's disagreement within the administration. We need answers and clarity from them now as to what ongoing operations are being based on. And then we can start having a discussion about what authorities they need to make sure that our troops are protected, that our number one priority of securing our installations and our men and women on the ground is taken care of, and what the path forward is.
How important do you view John Bolton's testimony? You talked about it a little bit. Do you feel like it's so vital and his firsthand knowledge is so important that should the Senate fail to call him and subpoena him, he should be called back to the House to share what he knows?
Well, that'll be a decision that ultimately will be made by some combination of Chairman Schiff, of course, the Speaker, and Chairman Nadler. His information does appear to be critical, but it appears critical in the context of enhancing what we already know based on 17 witnesses who did come forward and testify, including individuals like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Sondland, Ambassador Volker, Dr. Fiona Hill, Jennifer Williams. These are all individuals who were part of the Trump administration and confirmed factually that there was a stunning abuse of power that the president engaged in as it relates to the Ukraine scandal.
So you're leaving the door open, he could come back to the House?
Well, that's a question that I think is better directed at Chairman Schiff and, of course, Speaker Pelosi.
You guys have questioned whether there was an imminent threat presented by Soleimani, but you've also called him a terrorist and characterized all the casualties that he's inflicted on U.S. troops. I'm just wondering what's wrong with taking a terrorist out of the equation like this happened? Where's the dispute there?
Yeah, I'm going to yield to my colleagues, but that is an ongoing discussion, and we need clarity from the administration as to whether this particular provocative action made America safer or not. President George W. Bush and his administration made the decision affirmatively not to take out General Soleimani. President Barack Obama and his administration, which of course struck the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, also made the decision affirmatively not to take out General Soleimani. Israel, that has the capacity to strike someone like Soleimani, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, consistently made the decision not to take out General Soleimani. Presumably, all of these disparate individuals made this decision because they concluded it would not make the region, America, Israel, or the world safer. So we need answers from the administration. What has changed? Because what appears right now to have changed is that we have more troops in harm's way in the Middle East, 15,000 more troops than 6 months ago. What appears to have changed is that Iran's nuclear ambitions have been reignited. They have indicated they will now not be constrained by the nuclear agreement. What appears to have changed is that the effort to crush ISIS is in shambles, and the presence of American troops in Iraq is in doubt. What also has changed is that Israel is not safer as a result of these actions. They're potentially being threatened by Hezbollah and Iran's proxies in Lebanon. And so we need answers from this administration.
Just to add on this, coming from the work that I did before, when I hear that there's an imminent threat, that is a very particular and precise term. And when when I worked in Afghanistan and there were imminent threats of attacks against Americans, the type of work that we would try to do would be to go after the operators, to go after the weapons depot or the truck that was going to deliver the attack. What I'm left confused by is if there was an imminent threat, certainly taking out Qasem Soleimani is one part of that. But where is the rest of the equation here? Where was the attack against the warehouse depot, the housing the weapons, or the operators or the targeted cell of Kateb Hezbollah or whatever group was going to carry it out? So I don't actually understand if that threat has been neutralized or not, if that in fact was the case at all. So I'm left with a lot of just very concerned feelings right now about that. And the fact that I haven't, almost a week after this has started, still left with this kind of question is on top of it. The second thing I just want to say is that the decision of whether or not to strike a high-value target or a terrorist or some other actor is not necessarily one solely based off of are they a dangerous and bad person who has done terrible things. It is the fundamental question that we would encounter in the Situation Room is, are Americans going to be safer or not based on this decision and this action? That includes both the near term in terms of disrupting immediate threats, but it has to deal with sort of the broader implications. Are we safer if our counter-ISIS war comes to an end? Are we safer if Iran will now press on the gas to be able to achieve nuclear weapons? Are we safer if this gives Shia militia groups greater a reason to be able to target our forces and our diplomats in Iraq and the region? So it is not simply a question about how bad Qasem Soleimani was. He was obviously a terrible and dangerous person. I often called him the most dangerous person in the Middle East. But it has to be a broader question about, are Americans safer now?
Yeah, just to reiterate my colleague's comments, we have threats coming from many people in many places all throughout the world. I mean, you look at our sanctions list and our specially designated nationals list, it has thousands of names on it. And there's a reason why we don't send missiles to try to kill all of those people. It's because we are strong, not just because we have a strong and big military. It's because we're smart in how we use it, and we leverage all of our tools, including economic sanctions, diplomacy, and the strength of our allies and our partners throughout the world to contain those threats. So that is the question, is not whether or not there are lots of bad people out there who want to do us harm. That is well established. The question is whether or not in this particular instance, killing General Soleimani was in our national interests and it made us safer and it fed into a larger national strategy, a strategy that has not been described or articulated to this Congress or the American people yet.
Last question.
Very quickly, given the urgency of the situation in the Middle East, do you need to do more powers before you send the troops to North?
One issue doesn't have to do with the other, and they haven't been joined in terms of any of the discussions that we've had. Thank you.